My brother had a favorite joke. And unfortunately, I was the punchline. Whenever Jason Dixon introduced me to someone, he paused for dramatic effect before delivering it. "This is my sister Skylar," he would say, smiling like a performer waiting for applause. Then came the line he loved more than anything. The family failure. People reacted differently depending on how well they knew him. Some laughed loudly. Some forced polite smiles. A few looked uncomfortable. But Jason never noticed the difference. To him, humiliation was just another form of entertainment. He loved reminding people that I used to be married to a wealthy man. A man whose name appeared in business magazines and charity galas. And he loved reminding them how that story ended. "She walked away with nothing," he would say proudly. "No money. No house. Not even her kids." Those words always hung in the air like a cold wind. Because that part was true. 8 months ago, I had walked out of a courtroom without my children. Without my home. Without the life everyone believed was perfect. Now I lived in a small apartment 2 blocks away from the house where we grew up. The same house Jason inherited when our parents passed away. To him, that house proved something. That he had succeeded. And that I had failed. But what my brother didn't know was that the story he loved telling about me was missing one very important chapter. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. Now let me tell you how everything really began. My name is Skylar Dixon. I'm 42 years old. A divorcee. And a mother of 2 children who currently live in a house where I'm no longer welcome. That's the version of the story most people hear. The version my brother enjoys repeating. But stories always look simpler from the outside. I live in a modest apartment just down the street from the house where Jason and I grew up. From my kitchen window, I can see the maple tree in the front yard of that house. Our father planted it when I was 12. Back then, the house felt warm and full of life. Now it feels like a monument to everything my brother believes about success. Jason inherited the house after our parents passed away 3 years ago. And since then, he has treated it like a trophy. Proof that he is powerful. Proof that he is important. Proof that he is better than me. Because in his version of the story, I made the worst decision a woman could make. I left a wealthy husband. I destroyed my comfortable life. And somehow, I even lost custody of my children. But what Jason never cared to understand was why I made that decision. Because the truth about my marriage would destroy the simple story he likes to tell. My ex-husband, Victor Hale, was the kind of man people admired from a distance. Successful. Confident. Very rich. If you saw us together at charity dinners or business events, you would have assumed we had the perfect life. Beautiful house. Private schools for the children. Vacations that looked like magazine advertisements. But wealth has a way of hiding uncomfortable truths. Behind closed doors, Victor controlled everything. Where I went. Who I spoke to. What I wore. Even how I raised our children. At first the control was subtle. Small suggestions. Polite corrections. But over time those suggestions became rules. And those rules slowly turned the mansion into something that felt less like a home and more like a cage. Leaving meant walking away from everything people admired. The house. The cars. The financial security. But staying meant losing myself completely. So one night I packed 2 suitcases and walked out. I thought freedom would be the hardest part. I was wrong. The real battle began in the courtroom. And that was the day my brother decided I had ruined my life forever. The day I lost custody of my children felt like the sky had collapsed. Victor's lawyers arrived in the courtroom with stacks of documents that looked tall enough to build a wall. My attorney had only a thin folder. That difference alone told me everything I needed to know. Victor sat across the room looking calm, confident, almost bored. To him, the outcome had never been in doubt. His attorney spoke first. "Your Honor, Mr. Hale provides financial stability, private schooling, and a secure home environment." Every word sounded polished. Then they began attacking my life. They described me as impulsive for leaving the marriage, emotionally unstable after the divorce, financially unreliable. My lawyer tried to argue. She spoke about emotional well-being, about control, about the environment inside Victor's home. But the truth was simple. Victor had money. And money speaks loudly in courtrooms. When the judge finally read the decision, my heart stopped. Temporary primary custody will remain with Mr. Hale. The room blurred. I remember gripping the edge of the table just to stay upright. Victor didn't even look at me when the hearing ended. He simply stood, shook hands with his attorney, and walked out of the courtroom. That was the moment my brother Jason decided something about me. That I had ruined my life. And that I deserved it. The first weeks after the court ruling felt unbearable. The apartment was too quiet. No backpacks thrown on the couch. No laughter from the hallway. No voices calling Mom. The silence became a constant reminder of what I had lost. But grief has a strange way of turning into determination. Every morning I woke up early, opened my laptop, and began working. Most people assumed I had no career. Even Jason believed I spent my days doing nothing. That assumption worked in my favor. Because the work I did was quiet. Investment research. Market analysis. Strategy calls with partners in other cities. A year earlier, I had started consulting for a small investment group. Now that group was growing. Expanding. And slowly trusting my instincts with larger decisions. Every contract I reviewed, every meeting I attended, had one purpose. To prove something in court. That I could provide stability. That I could build something real. And most importantly, that I could bring my children home again. Jason never noticed the changes. He only saw what he wanted to see. A divorced woman living in a small apartment. What he didn't see was the foundation being built underneath everything. The street between my apartment and the Dixon house was short. 2 blocks. But emotionally it felt like crossing a battlefield. Every afternoon when I returned from grocery shopping or a walk, I usually saw Jason outside. Sometimes washing his expensive car. Sometimes standing on the porch with Clara. He always noticed me. And he never missed an opportunity. "Well, look who's back from another exhausting day of doing absolutely nothing," he called one afternoon. Clara laughed politely beside him. I kept walking. Silence had become my best defense. But Jason wasn't finished. "Skylar," he shouted again. "You should thank Victor. At least he gave you that apartment money before the court took your kids." For a moment my chest tightened. The words hit exactly where he intended. But I didn't turn around. Because something had changed inside me over the past months. Pain had turned into focus. And focus had turned into patience. Jason believed he understood my story. He believed I was the woman who lost everything. What he didn't realize was that the quiet sister he mocked every afternoon was slowly becoming the most powerful person in the room. And soon, our two worlds were about to collide. 2 weeks later, Jason hosted a gathering at the family house. He called it a business mixer, but in reality it was an excuse to show off his success. The living room was filled with people from his company, executives, managers, and a few local investors. Clara moved gracefully through the room greeting guests while soft jazz played in the background. I hadn't planned to attend. But Clara insisted. Family should support family, she said sweetly over the phone. The moment I walked in, Jason noticed me. Perfect, he said loudly, clapping his hands together. Several people turned toward us. This is my sister Skylar, he announced. Then he paused just long enough to deliver the line he loved. The family failure. A few people laughed politely. Others exchanged uncomfortable looks. Jason continued speaking as if he were telling a harmless story. She used to be married to a billionaire, he explained to one of his coworkers. Then he lowered his voice dramatically. Now she works from home. The implication hung in the air. Unemployment. Dependence. Embarrassment. I simply smiled and took a sip of water. Because none of those people knew the truth. They didn't know about the meetings. They didn't know about the investment group. And they definitely didn't know that in less than 48 hours. My brother's professional life and my quiet success were about to collide in the same room. The next morning began like every other. Coffee. Laptop. Market reports. At exactly 9:30 a.m. My phone rang. The number displayed a downtown business district code. Skylar Dixon speaking. Good morning, Ms. Dixon, a calm voice replied. This is Martin Hale from Blackridge Capital. I straightened in my chair. Blackridge Capital was the firm coordinating the new investment partnership. We're confirming tomorrow's meeting, he continued. Our CEO is eager to finalize the expansion deal. I'll be there, I said. And the executives from Dixon Technologies will also attend, he added. Dixon Technologies. Jason's company. I paused for a second. Yes, I said slowly. That's correct. The voice on the line sounded pleased. Excellent. The boardroom meeting is scheduled for 10 o'clock. After the call ended, I stared at the screen for several seconds. Life has a strange sense of timing. Because tomorrow morning, I would walk into the same building where my brother worked. And he had absolutely no idea. The next morning I passed the Dixon house while heading toward the train station. Jason was standing beside his car adjusting his tie. He looked unusually excited. Big day? I asked casually. He smirked. You wouldn't understand. Clara appeared beside him. Jason has an important investment meeting today, she said proudly. Jason nodded. Our company might secure funding that will expand the entire operation. That's impressive, I replied. He smiled smugly. Some of us actually build successful careers. Then he looked at me carefully. You should try it sometime. I sipped my coffee calmly. Good luck with the meeting. Jason laughed as he climbed into his car. You wouldn't even be allowed into that building. I watched him drive away. Then I checked the time on my phone. 9:05 a.m. Plenty of time. Because in less than an hour, I would walk into the same building and step into the same meeting. The glass tower downtown looked exactly like every corporate building in the financial district. Polished floors. Tall windows. People moving quickly with briefcases and coffee cups. I stepped inside the elevator and pressed the button for the 18th floor. Just before the doors closed, someone rushed in. Jason. He froze the moment he saw me. Skylar? I smiled calmly. Good morning. He frowned. What are you doing here? I have a meeting. Jason laughed. Here? Yes. The elevator began moving upward. Floor by floor. You must be in the wrong building, he said confidently. This floor is for investors. I know. The doors opened. People stepped out. Jason stayed beside me. You should leave before security notices, he added. But instead of leaving, I walked straight down the hallway toward the largest conference room and opened the door. The boardroom inside was already full of executives. Jason followed behind me, confused. Then the CEO of the company entered the room. And everything changed. The boardroom on the 18th floor was larger than I expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and a polished oak table stretched across the room like a runway. At least a dozen executives were already seated when Jason and I stepped inside. The moment he entered, Jason's posture changed. His shoulders straightened, his voice grew deeper, and he walked with the confidence of someone who believed this room existed for him. This is it, he whispered, leaning slightly toward me. You should really leave before someone asks what you're doing here. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out a chair near the end of the table and sat down. Jason stared at me. What are you doing? Waiting, I said calmly. For what? For the meeting to start. His expression hardened. This meeting is for investors and executives. I know. Before he could respond again, the door opened. 3 senior managers entered first. Behind them walked a tall man with silver hair and a calm authority that immediately quieted the room. Jason stood up quickly. Mr. Caldwell, he said respectfully. The CEO nodded politely. Good morning, everyone. Then his eyes moved across the room. And stopped on me. A slow smile appeared on his face. Mr. Caldwell placed his briefcase on the table and looked around the room. Before we begin, he said, I'd like to introduce someone important. Jason straightened his jacket. He clearly believed the introduction was meant for him. After all, he had spent weeks bragging about this investment opportunity to anyone who would listen. The CEO continued speaking. As many of you know, this expansion project required significant outside capital. Several executives nodded. The individual who made that possible is joining us today. Jason's smile widened. But Mr. Caldwell wasn't looking at him. He turned toward my seat. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, gesturing toward me, please welcome the lead investor for this project. The room went silent. Jason blinked. Ms. Skylar Dixon. For a moment, no one moved. Jason slowly turned toward me, confusion spreading across his face. You, he whispered. I folded my hands calmly on the table. Yes. Mr. Caldwell continued speaking as if nothing unusual had happened. Ms. Dixon represents the investment partnership funding this expansion. Several executives began nodding in recognition. They had already spoken with me during earlier negotiations. But for Jason, this was the first time the truth had entered the room. Jason sat down slowly. His face had lost its usual color. That can't be right, he said quietly. Mr. Caldwell glanced toward him. Is there a problem, Mr. Dixon? Jason looked between us. She's my sister. The CEO raised an eyebrow. Well, he replied calmly, that's an interesting coincidence. Several executives exchanged curious glances. Jason shook his head. No, you don't understand. She doesn't. He stopped mid-sentence. Because finishing that thought would require admitting what he had always believed about me. That I did nothing. That I had nothing. That I was nothing. I leaned forward slightly. Is there something you'd like to say, Jason? The room grew quiet. He swallowed. No. Mr. Caldwell turned back to the presentation screen. As I was saying, he continued, the funding package totals $35 million. A slide appeared on the screen outlining the investment structure. Jason stared at it. Then he looked at me again. Because in that moment, he realized something that had never occurred to him before. The sister he had mocked for months was the person deciding whether his company would grow or collapse. The meeting continued for nearly 30 minutes. Financial projections filled the screen. Revenue forecasts. Market expansion strategies. The entire time, Jason remained unusually quiet. For once, he had nothing to say. Finally, Mr. Caldwell closed the presentation. He looked around the table. Any final comments? No one spoke. Then he turned toward me. Ms. Dixon, he said politely, the decision is yours. Every executive in the room turned their attention toward me. Jason's breathing became noticeably heavier. Because the future of his company now depended entirely on the woman he called a failure. I looked slowly around the room. Then my eyes settled on Jason. For months he had laughed at my losses. My divorce. My apartment. The day I lost custody of my children. Now the balance of power had shifted completely. The proposal is promising, I said calmly. Jason exhaled quietly. But I wasn't finished. However, I continued, I do have one condition. The room grew silent again. Because when investors mention conditions, people listen. Mr. Caldwell leaned forward. What kind of condition? I kept my voice steady. I want full transparency in leadership operations. Several executives nodded immediately. That's reasonable, one of them said. But I continued. And I want one structural change. Jason's eyes narrowed. What change? The CEO asked. I turned my chair slightly. Directly toward my brother. The client relations director should be reassigned. The room fell silent. Because that position belonged to Jason. He stood abruptly. You can't be serious. Mr. Caldwell looked surprised. Mr. Dixon? Jason pointed at me. This is personal. I shook my head calmly. No, then I looked directly at him. Client relations require respect for people. My voice remained calm. And based on how you speak about others. I paused. I'm not confident you represent the company well. Jason's face turned red. For the first time in his life. The room no longer belonged to him. The room remained silent for several seconds after I finished speaking. Jason stood frozen beside his chair, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Mr. Caldwell finally broke the silence. Well, he said calmly, that is certainly a reasonable observation. Jason looked at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. The CEO folded his hands thoughtfully. Ms. Dixon is investing $35 million into this expansion, he replied. His voice was calm but firm. That gives her the right to make structural recommendations. Structural recommendations. The phrase sounded polite. But everyone in the room understood what it meant. Power. Jason sat down slowly. For the rest of the meeting, he barely spoke. Every few minutes he glanced toward me, as if trying to understand how the sister he had mocked for months had suddenly become the most important person in the room. When the meeting finally ended, executives began gathering their papers. Mr. Caldwell shook my hand. Excellent work today, Ms. Dixon. Thank you, I said. Jason didn't move. He remained seated, staring at the empty presentation screen. Because the story he had told about me for months had just collapsed in front of his entire company. As I stepped into the hallway outside the boardroom, I heard quick footsteps behind me. Skylar. I turned. Jason stood there, breathing heavily. What is going on? He demanded. His voice wasn't mocking anymore. It was confused. How do you suddenly have millions of dollars? I don't, I replied calmly. He frowned. Then how are you funding the company? I represent an investment partnership. Jason stared at me. You're telling me you've been working with investors this entire time? Yes. He ran a hand through his hair. Why didn't you say anything? I almost laughed. When would I have said it? I asked quietly. During the times you introduced me as the family failure? Jason looked away. For the first time since our parents died. My brother seemed unsure of himself. Then he asked the question he had avoided for months. Why are you doing this? The answer was simple. My children. We stood in the quiet hallway while office employees passed by. Everything I've been doing this year, I said, has been about one thing. Jason crossed his arms. The custody case. Yes. Victor had convinced the court that I couldn't provide stability. That I didn't have the financial resources to support the children on my own. At the time, he was right. But things had changed. The court review hearing is next month, I continued. Jason looked surprised. You're going back to court? Yes. And you think this, he gestured toward the conference room, will help? It proves stability. He stared at the floor for several seconds. Then he said something I never expected. You should have told me. I shook my head gently. You never asked. That evening I sat at my kitchen table reviewing legal documents. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Financial reports. Investment agreements. Bank statements. Letters from business partners confirming my role in the partnership. Every page represented months of work. Months of rebuilding my life from nothing. My lawyer had explained everything carefully. The court would reconsider custody if my circumstances had changed significantly. Financial stability. Consistent income. Demonstrated responsibility. All the things Victor had used against me before. Now those same factors were working in my favor. I closed the folder slowly. Because tomorrow morning, my attorney would file the petition to modify custody. And this time, I would walk into that courtroom prepared. The next morning someone knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Jason standing in the hallway. He looked uncomfortable. Like someone visiting a place he had never noticed before. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He looked around the small apartment quietly. So this is where you've been living, he said. Yes. Jason nodded slowly. Then he turned toward me. You're really fighting to get the kids back. Yes. He hesitated. I didn't realize how serious this was for you. I raised an eyebrow. They're my children. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Jason sighed. If the court hearing is next month, he said quietly. You might need witnesses. I studied him carefully. Why? He looked at the floor. Because I owe you that much. The courtroom looked exactly the same as the day I lost my children. Same wooden benches. Same quiet echo of footsteps across the floor. Same heavy feeling in the air. But this time I wasn't the same person. My lawyer sat beside me reviewing the final documents while Victor and his legal team entered on the opposite side of the room. Victor looked confident, just like before. He glanced toward me briefly. Then he looked away. 8 months earlier he had walked out of this room victorious. Today he expected the same ending. The judge entered and everyone stood. The hearing began quickly. Victor's attorney spoke first. Your Honor, my client continues to provide stability, financial security, and a consistent home environment. It sounded familiar. Almost identical to the argument that had won the case the first time. But then my attorney stood. Your Honor, the circumstances that led to the previous ruling have changed dramatically. She placed several folders on the judge's desk. These documents demonstrate that Ms. Schuyler Dixon now manages a successful investment partnership responsible for a $35 million corporate expansion. Victor's attorney frowned, because the story they had built months earlier was starting to crumble. Victor stood slowly when it was his turn. Your Honor, he began calmly, money alone doesn't make someone a better parent. The irony of that statement almost made me smile. Because the last time we stood in this courtroom, money had been the entire argument against me. Victor continued speaking. My concern has always been stability for our children. My lawyer rose again. With respect, Your Honor, that is precisely what Ms. Dixon has spent the past year establishing. She gestured toward the documents. These records demonstrate consistent income, professional responsibility, and long-term financial planning. The judge reviewed the paperwork carefully. Every page represented nights of research, meetings, negotiations, and decisions that had built the investment partnership from nothing. Victor shifted slightly in his chair. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Your Honor, my attorney said, we have one additional witness. The courtroom doors opened. Jason stepped inside. Victor turned around sharply. Jason walked to the witness stand, his posture nervous but determined. He raised his right hand and took the oath. Then he looked toward the judge. I'm Schuyler's brother, he said. The judge nodded. What would you like to tell the court? Jason hesitated. Then he took a deep breath. For months I believed my sister had ruined her life. The courtroom was silent. But I was wrong. He explained how I had built the investment partnership. How I had worked every day without recognition. How everything I did was focused on one goal. Getting my children back. Jason looked toward me briefly. She's the most determined person I know, he finished quietly. And those kids belong with their mother. The judge closed the final folder and leaned back in her chair. The room felt unbearably quiet. Every second stretched longer than the last. Finally she spoke. After reviewing the updated evidence, the court recognizes that Ms. Dixon's circumstances have changed significantly. My hands tightened under the table. The judge continued. Financial stability, professional responsibility, and demonstrated commitment to her children have been clearly established. Victor stared straight ahead. Then the judge delivered the words I had waited 8 months to hear. The custody arrangement will be modified. My heart raced. Primary custody will be granted to Ms. Schuyler Dixon. For a moment the world seemed to stop. Because the battle that had defined my life for nearly a year was finally over. The apartment felt different that evening. Backpacks rested near the door. Shoes were scattered across the hallway. My children's laughter filled every room. It sounded like home again. Later that week I walked past the Dixon house. Jason stood outside speaking with a neighbor. When he saw me, he waved. This is my sister Schuyler, he said. The neighbor smiled politely. Jason paused for a moment. Then he finished the sentence. The strongest person in our family. I smiled and continued walking. Because the truth was simple. I had never needed my brother's approval. I only needed the chance to rebuild my life. And the woman he once called the family failure had just become the person who refused to give up.